So my name's Joanna Lees. I'm the Marketing Director for Realinx, and I'll cover the high-level material, and then Raphael Londner, who's the Realinx founder and CTO, he's also on the call for the technical presentation and demo.
Hi everyone. Good to have you all.
So on this slide here, if you need to contact us after the presentation, if you've got any additional questions, any follow-up, you can use the contact info listed here. We'll put it up again at the end of the presentation, and we'll get back to you quickly. Also feel free to check the Realinx website for more information on Extradium, or you can go ahead and like us on our Facebook page. So what are we going to cover today? Well, as many of you are SharePoint users and admins, you probably know that SharePoint's great for sharing information internally, but there's a number of issues that you can encounter when your employees want to share your documents externally. So that's why an extranet can be useful. So we'll cover what is an extranet, why you should consider using one if you don't already, and we'll discuss how to support external users and extranets in the SharePoint environment specifically, and considerations around security and governance, which are so important when you're introducing external users into your extranet environment. Finally, Raphael will talk about the Realinx Extradium solution, some considerations for setting up a SharePoint extranet, and give you a demo of some of the most important features. And we'll be sure to leave some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. So as we're going through the presentation, do feel free to use the question tab in GoToWebinar and add any questions that come up. So, what is the challenge with external information sharing? As you all know, in today's competitive business environment, employees increasingly now are needing to share company information not only with other employees in their team, but also with people outside the organization, customers, suppliers, channel partners, etc. And SharePoint really doesn't support external users, as I'm sure many of you know, so employees end up resorting to other means to share their information externally, which can raise all kinds of problems. So for example, they might just use email, very common, right? They send updated documents as attachments. Really in the company you have little control over who they're sending them to, what versions are being sent out. There can be confusion about old versions in their inbox, missed messages, etc. And that ends up with a team dealing with out-of-date versions, personal versions of documents that individuals have chosen to update for themselves, etc. And in many cases, employees may need to resort to sharing information in meetings. Now, of course, meetings are an important tool in effective collaboration, but they really should be used for value-add discussion, not simply for information sharing, which can be done in a much more seamless way. And then the other issue is that many employees might choose to use public document sharing sites like Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. Even though these are insecure, they're outside the corporate firewall, you have no control over them, etc. As you all know, there's really three ways that companies share information online, right? First, an intranet solution like SharePoint allows employees to collaborate, communicate. You can't really easily add external users in that situation. On the internet, a public website can be great for sharing information publicly. Your product information, information about services, updates, public updates, etc. But of course, you don't have an ability in that case to restrict access to only a subset of users. And so that's where an extranet, short for the extended intranet, comes in handy. So in that situation, you can support your users who need to regularly share confidential information with authorized users outside the company. And they can then use the extranet environment. So what I'd like to do now is do a quick poll. So I'd like to understand what version of SharePoint you're all currently using. So please, you should see the poll there in front of you. Why don't you go ahead, select the button next to one of the 5 options, and I'll give a few seconds to answer the poll. So if you're on the latest version of SharePoint, SharePoint 2013, you can go ahead and select that one. There's also SharePoint 2010, or if you're on an older version, SharePoint 2007 or 2003, then choose option number 3. If you're on Office 365, SharePoint Online, then choose number 4. And for those of you in a hybrid environment using Office 365 plus on-premises SharePoint, you can go ahead with number 5. So we'll just give everyone a few seconds to answer that poll, and then we'll go ahead and share those results. So thanks for entering your poll. It looks like most of you are using SharePoint 2013 and 2010. So, that's good. That's good news because, I think in that situation, as Raphael will talk about a little bit later, with the latest versions of SharePoint, some of you are using SharePoint Online, and, there are some, potentially some challenges there. So we will definitely talk about that. Okay, then. So moving on, what are some of the benefits of an extranet? Obviously, we talked about the fact that it can resolve, some of the challenges that we talked about earlier. So you'll find that, benefits such as increasing business productivity. New information can get shared automatically. Employees don't have to manually update their partners. They can reduce errors. They can improve version control. And then an additional item is that, meeting times, face-to-face travel can be used for, truly value-add business discussions rather than simply updating people with information that can be shared via an extranet. So it can reduce meeting time, reduce travel costs, and make those more productive and effective. For the IT staff, you'll find there'll be less time needed for administration, technical support overhead. And this all results in, ideally, improved customer service, better communication with your business partners, and really all of the authorized parties get immediate access to the information that they're enabled to access as soon as it's available. But of course, as with all things, an extranet can come with its challenges. And, one of the issues for those of you who are, and I know many of you are, obviously SharePoint users, SharePoint doesn't easily support an extranet out of the box. So you end up having to look at other options. A second challenge is if you choose the wrong deployment option or configuration for your extranet, you can end up with a bad user experience, and that'll just drive those users back to those old, insecure ways of sharing information that they did in the past. Things like unclear logins, no self-service for simple problems like password recovery, error messages that are really unclear without contacting IT for help, etc. The third issue can be security. You have to be really careful, and this is something that Raphael will go into in more detail during the demo, but you have to be very careful when you're setting up your extranet that you're not compromising the security and privacy of existing users in your directory when you deploy that extranet. A fourth challenge can be just in the time-consuming administration and overhead. If you don't set up your extranet properly, if you perhaps choose the wrong solution for your particular needs, it actually can lead to additional headaches on the administration side, which is really what you wanted to avoid in the first place. And then finally, there are open source solutions for extranets in SharePoint, and Raphael will talk about this a little further when he gets into the demo presentation. They're not necessarily the easiest route. It really depends on what your needs are, but they can be not very user-friendly, can be time-consuming to set up and administer, and fairly limited feature-wise. So again, some things to keep in mind as you're planning your extranet environment. Okay, what I'd like to do now, before handing the presentation over to Raphael, we've got 1 second poll that we'd like everyone to go ahead and respond to about your experiences currently to date with a SharePoint extranet. So please go ahead, vote in the poll on your screen. I'll give you a few seconds. One request, and that is for those of you on the call who are already Extradium customers. If you'd go ahead and not answer the poll, if you have already, that's okay. But this is for those folks who are not already Extradium customers. So the first option, if you've already got an extranet, you're using an open source solution, then go ahead and choose option 1. And option 2, if you are using another SharePoint commercial add-on product, then you can go ahead and choose that. If you're using a custom developed solution, then look at option number 3. And option number 4 is if you're planning an extranet, thinking about it in the planning stages, perhaps in the evaluation stages, but you haven't deployed one yet. And then in the 5th case, if you're not actively planning an extranet right now, you're interested in the information, you're thinking about it, but it's not something you're in the planning stages, then choose that option.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you so much, and thank you for voting to our second poll. And the results that you probably are seeing right now are that large majority of you do not have an extranet yet, but or you're planning an extranet, but you haven't deployed it yet, which is great. So obviously you're interested in this webinar, hopefully. We have a few number of about 11% who use the complex FBA pack and 22% who use a custom developed solution. So that's about 1/3 of all the attendees who actually already have an extranet. Plus, if I count 4% who use another commercial product. So you might be interested in some of the highlights I will show next in my slides and my demo. So let me move on with the presentation at this point. I remember that quite a few of you mentioned that you're actually using SharePoint Online or SharePoint Hybrid, which is a mix of on-premises SharePoint as well as Office 365. A few of you might think, well, why not use SharePoint Online as an extranet? And there is actually an external sharing option available in SharePoint Online. And as you can see here in this screenshot, I'm trying to share a site with Jim Woodward from the BBAG organization, and SharePoint Online detects that this user is not part of my organization, so it's going to send an invitation email to Jim. And if Jim clicks on the go-to link that's in the invitation, it will have an opportunity to sign in. So obviously here you see that there's already a limitation because SharePoint Online requires that you log in either with a Microsoft account, Windows Live account, Outlook.com account, or with an organizational account, which is really an Office 365 account. And if Jim doesn't have any of those, then it will probably have to create an account, a Microsoft account, which is both inconvenient and cumbersome at best. Now the problem is that if you really take a close look at those invitations, you find that they're not secure. First of all, they're not really tied to the invited emails. They can actually be forwarded. You can forward it to your spouse, to your mother, your grandmother, and they could sign in with those invitations. And you, as the sender of those invitations, you would not even know about that. As a matter of fact, they can be used with any Microsoft or Office 365 account. So let's see what happens after I try to invite Jim with his corporate email address. Well, as a matter of fact, what I found out after the fact is that Jim has chosen to log on with his personal Outlook.com email address. Now, SharePoint Online does remember the original email address, which is the one that you see here in the work email field. But the account that Jim uses is a personal account, and he could actually have forwarded that invitation to someone else, and they could have used that invitation to sign in on your SharePoint Online site. So as far as we're concerned, the issue we have with SharePoint Online is that you find out that you cannot enforce that the user you invite signs in with the email that you invited with. And there's really no management UI for external users in SharePoint Online. And you also find out that there's no auditing capability, so you don't know when your external users actually sign in or what they do on your site. Overall, as far as we're concerned at RealLinks, we think that SharePoint Online is fine if you only want to use it for limited external sharing with a few people you trust. But even Microsoft recognizes, they admit that it's not really full-fledged extranet solution. So if you want to have a professional and robust extranet, your best option is still to go with on-premises SharePoint or with SharePoint in the cloud. That could be in a private cloud, or that could be in a public cloud as well. But it has to be your own SharePoint farm. And obviously, the rest of the presentation will assume that we are in this deployment scenario where we actually own the SharePoint farm itself. Now, if you take a look at how SharePoint works in terms of authentication, because clearly one of the first issue you have to fix when you think about an extranet is, how do I authenticate my external users, right? So once again, if you look at SharePoint and all the authentication options that you can choose from, well, first of all, obviously there's Windows authentication that you are already familiar with, and which is used by your internal users when they sign in. However, as Joanna mentioned, if you use Windows authentication for your external users, then that means that typically you have to store your external users within your own Active Directory, which is really a no-no. It's not secure at all because they could access your network afterwards. And even from a pure user experience perspective, the sign-in experience is very awkward, and there's really no self-service capabilities available. So it's really not a good option for an extranet. Now, the second option you have is forms-based authentication, also known as FBA for acronym lovers, such as myself. And we'll talk about that later because that's the one that Extradium leverages. I do want to mention the third option that's available to you, which is trusted identity providers. And typically, trusted identity providers are used when, for instance, you want to have federated authentication between you and all the external organization you work with. Typically, you would use Active Directory Federation services, and just installing ADFS and configuring it, and then tying it to SharePoint is a pretty lengthy and error-prone process. And if you deal with a lot of organizations, then you have to build trust with each and every of those external organizations. So it might not be very practical, but it is an option, obviously. The second way that you could use trusted identity providers is with social authentication. And the third way, obviously, is any other system that support and that can generate SAML tokens. You can see here in this screenshot, that it's pretty clear in SharePoint that you have those three options. By default, only Windows authentication is enabled, but you can obviously add additional ones. So for instance, here you see that both Windows and forms-based authentication are enabled, and this is called mixed mode authentication, which means that users have the option to choose between one of those two options when they sign in. And you can also obviously add a trusted identity provider if you want. Extradium does support mixed mode authentication. And, we'll see that in a second during the demo. Now, I do want to mention that we do have another product called BizLinks that supports the trusted identity provider option with social authentication. So if that's something that's of interest to you, if you want to authenticate your external users with their social credentials on LinkedIn, Yammer, Yahoo, Facebook, or others, you can contact us after the webinar, and we'll be happy to talk about that. If I go back to Extradium, as I said, Extradium leverages FBA and actually uses its own SQL Server database to store the external accounts. And once you've set up Extradium, you have this nice-looking login screen on the right-hand side where users can actually enter their credentials on a form, hence the forms-based authentication keyword. Now, in terms of architecture, some of you might be interested in that. If you use Extradium, well, first of all, obviously, you still have Active Directory for your internal users, and then you have this additional SQL Server database that I mentioned. And then on top of that, obviously, SharePoint can connect to each of those depending on the options, the authentication option that your users choose. So for instance, internal users typically will choose to sign in with their Active Directory account, while your external users will choose to authenticate through the form. In order for SharePoint to connect to the Extradium SQL Server database, you need an additional component called an FBA provider that is configured on the SharePoint side. Now, one of the things that I could do right now is to talk about all the features that we provide with Extradium, but that would take a long time, probably hours, and not be very very useful. So instead, what I want to do is I want to talk about what we think are the three unique strengths of Extradium, and that really reflect the values that we have and the philosophy we have when we build products at WeLinks. So the first one I want to mention is installation and configuration. For those of you who have experience setting up FBA with, either the CodePlex FBA pack or, some custom developed solutions, you probably know that it's a very lengthy and error-prone process and can take a few hours to a few days. With Extradium, our promise is that you can have a ready-to-use extranet in about 10 to 15 minutes, and you don't have to do any manual modification of web config files or any other files or run scripts. It's all driven by the UI, by the web UI. And as a matter of fact, even when you maintain the system, you still can change all of those, all of the configurations on our Extradium administration set, which I will show in a few minutes. So that's really for all of you IT administrators. We want to make your life a lot easier, and you have much better things to do than to actually spend hours setting up products. I've actually been in your own shoes. I've been an IT administrator in a previous life, and I know how busy you are and how many priorities you need to juggle with. And so having a product that just works out of the box in just a few minutes, I think is a time saver and something that you would value. We know that you are the first users of the product, so that's why we put so much emphasis on installation and configuration. But obviously, over the course of your use of Extradium, really the main users are both your colleagues, your internal users, as well as external users. So we've also put a lot of emphasis on usability in terms of the sign-in experience, the ability to have self-service capabilities such as password reset, password recovery, as well as for your power users to be able to easily manage those external users in intuitive and responsive user interface, to also be able to send invitations, automatically assign users to specific groups when they sign up. So we have all that available already. The third key strength that we think Extradium has is security. As a matter of fact, if you look at SharePoint from an extranet point of view, you'll find out, or maybe you don't, what I can tell you is that there are quite a few security issues with a SharePoint extranet. So first of all, if you really want to take advantage of all the SharePoint capabilities, for instance, let's say you're an engineering firm and you work with a lot of contractors on specific construction projects, you don't just need to share documents. You also want to work on the project. So you want to take advantage of SharePoint project management features such as tasks. So whenever you use tasks, you obviously need to assign a task to someone. It's not something that's done magically by the system. And to assign a task, typically you will use a people picker. However, what you'll find out is if you use a people picker, both your internal users as well as your external users can see all the users in the underlying repository. So for instance, your external users could see all of your colleagues and they could see all of the other external users as well, which is obviously a big security concern because you might not want them to see everyone, especially you might not want them to know about the other contractors that are set up on your extranet. That's a huge security issue which we actually address in Extradium. Now another one is a privacy concern with user profiles. There's this infamous userdisp.aspx page which is used to actually render your profile, especially in SharePoint Foundation. And what you might not know is that this page allows pretty much any user to browse through all the list of users who actually access the site at some point in time. So they could gather information about accounts, full names, as well as email addresses, and sometimes more just by using this page. Now the third one is that form-based authentication is ultimately it's still a single-factor authentication. Obviously you might have heard of all the hacking scandals in the past year, and obviously I think we can expect a few more in the coming years. One of them that was quite striking was a celebrity hack on Apple iCloud. If you looked at the news, you probably realized that the reason why all those private pictures got leaked is because those stars they just used simple accounts and passwords, and it was pretty easy for hackers to find them out and log in and get all of those pictures. So obviously, if you have something more secure, such as SecondFactor Authentication, then it's a lot harder for hackers to get into your account and steal valuable property or confidential information that you share with your external users. And as a matter of fact, Extradium is the only platform to date that provides SecondFactor Authentication out of the box. With that, I know that we are getting tired of slides, so let me switch to my demo environment at this point, and I'll show you how that works. So first of all, I want to set the context here. So first of all, I wanted you to see, a comparison of the Coldplex FBA pack and probably quite a few other commercial products with Extradium. And to that end, what I did is I created two web applications. One is partners.company.com, which is powered by Extradium. And here I'm connected as a Windows user, actually the SharePoint administrator itself. I have another one called the Coldplex FBA pack, and so they're very similar. The only thing we changed really is the titles of the site so that you can see the difference, but we pretty much have the same structure here. So we have an anonymous site here where external users could access. Here, obviously, I'm already authenticated, so I can see quite a few things, including the site settings button here, and I see all of the other site collections that were set up. For instance, you see that there's Bluebird, Contoso, or Starlight. Those are three organizations that I work with, or are my contractors. And I have another site collection called Joint Project, where I have both Bluebird and Contoso work on a project, because they're different types of contractors, and I want them to work on a single project, so I have a specific site collection for that. What I want to show a little bit is how we set up the users. So let me start with how they were set up in the Coldplex FBA pack interface. So those are all the users that were set up, and you can see that I have a few users from Bluebird, Contoso, Starlight, etc. Not necessarily very easy to find them through that search interface. But if I switch over to Extradium, the Extradium interface, this is what you would get. So this is the center of command of Extradium. This is what you get after you run the installer. You get this Extradium Central Administration site tucked in the central administration. And so the first step you take typically is you set up your database in here. This is where you will just have to specify your Extradium database location. And once you're done, hopefully that page will load pretty quickly. Here you go. You just specify the database server name, just press OK. That provisions your database for you, takes care of all the security aspects of accessing the database. Next step is you configure forms-based authentication on your web application. Here I'm going to, I've already activated it on the extranet zone, and you can see here that Extradium authentication is on, anonymous access is on as well. And that's pretty much it. You don't have to change any manual files. It's all done in pretty much 2 clicks. Now, in terms of users, those are the users that I've set up, and you will see in a few seconds again that they're pretty much the same users that were set up in Coldplex. Now, the different thing is that you can very easily filter those users by just typing their name or username or whatever you want. So you can even type their email address, and you see here that I have 3 users in the Bluebird organization. I have Jim, Marcella, and Mary. Okay? Now, let's see how what the user experience would be if I signed in as a Coldplex user. So first of all, I have no sign-in web part available on the site itself. What I need to do is I need to click on sign in, and then I go through this awkward page where I need to select either Windows or Forms, and then obviously, it's not easy to know which option I need to choose, but let's assume I know that I need to select Forms Authentication. Then I get to that other page, which is, pretty much almost blank. I don't even know where I am at this point, but, let's assume that I trust that page and I enter my, my credentials. Now, eventually, I'm signed in. And so Jim, remember that Jim is part of the Bluebird organization. So in this case, he only has access to the Bluebird site collection as well as the Joint Project site collection. If he goes to the Bluebird project, and let's assume that he's working on tasks. Now, if I go to tasks here, and I try to fill out the assigned to field, let's say that I search for MAR. All right, so what you realize here is that I see a lot of users. I see, Marcella, which is a colleague, but I also see Mark, who's in the Star organization. And not only that, so I see all of those users who match my search for external users, but not only that, I also see all of those internal users. So I see Marilyn Monroe, I see Marlene Dietrich. Yes, I know they don't work in Hollywood anymore. They've chosen to have a more stable job at my engineering firm. But anyways, the problem you have here is that you can see all of those users. And that's obviously a big security risk here. You're sharing all that information with your external users. Now, if I go through the same process inside Extradium, so first of all, what you notice is that you have a much nicer login interface. And you see that we actually have multilingual support, so I could actually switch to German or French or any other language. Let me just go back to English because that's the one I'm most familiar with. And now I can log in with Jim. By the way, if your site has not been enabled with anonymous authentication, you would see this screen, which is still, much nicer to look at, and you can very easily customize those images and text and colors within the site collection. Now, if I log in as Jim again, and by the way, what I wanted to mention is that your internal users typically would sign in here by clicking on sign in with Windows credentials. What is not set up here is that you can also, if you know all the IP addresses of your internal users, you can actually bypass that screen and they can log in automatically to the extranet. Now, if I sign in as Jim, now I have access to Bluebird, as I did on the Coldplex FBA pack web application. Now, if I create a task here and I go to assign to field and I type Mar, well, first of all, what you notice here is I see fewer users. First of all, I only see Mary and Marcella, so I only see my own colleagues. And so by default, Extradium enforces user segregation or multi-tenancy, which is the ability to make sure that your external users typically only see their own colleagues, the way that you define their organizations in Extradium. Now you see that one of the issues that Jim still sees Marilyn and Marlene, which are internal users. So that's obviously quite of an issue here. Now if you go to join project, for instance, and you create a task here, on this one you have both Contoso and Bluebird. So you see a few more users. You see Mark and Mary B, and those ones actually work in at Contoso if I'm correct. So you see them here. So you have the ability to customize on a site collection basis who you can see. One other usability issue that you might notice is that when you see external users, you really only see their logins here. You don't actually see their full name as you do with Active Directory users. And obviously that's very confusing, and even for your own internal users, it's confusing because if those logins are not easy to guess, then that's an issue for them to use the people picker. How do we go about and address that issue? Well, first of all, let me just go back to the Bluebird site here, and then I'll switch to the Extradium Central Administration. Now, if you use the Extradium Professional Edition, you can go to the people picker settings page and choose your zone and say, okay, I want to use the Extradium claim provider. And this guy is going to basically take care of resolving the users with their full name so that you have a much better user experience. But you can also choose to restrict the visibility of your internal users just to the site collection. So, and you see the difference in a second. Oh, by the way, I did not choose the proper zone. So let me just go and switch to the extended zone. Here we go. So now if I go back to my Bluebird site and I click on New Task, now if I try to assign a user to I type MAR. Now here we go. First of all, I have a much better experience because I see the full name of my colleagues, Marcella and Mary, but I also only see Marilyn Monroe. I don't see Marlene Dietrich anymore. And the reason for that is because Marilyn Monroe is the only internal user who actually has access and actually is using the Bluebird site. She's actually my trusted contact at the company, and that's why I can see her here. But otherwise, I don't see other users, which is obviously a good thing. Now, the other aspect that I mentioned in terms of security is the problem with privacy. So if I go back, once again to the Coldplex site, and I go back to my partner extranet, then I can take a look at my own settings. Okay, and this is basically my profile in SharePoint Foundation. If you use SharePoint Server, you might be redirected to another page, but you can even force, by default actually here it says force equal true, so it means that it's actually forcing SharePoint to actually display that page. And you can see here that I see my account, my name, my email. Now, if you take a close look at the URL, you notice that this is where the userdis.asp page comes into play. Now, the problem is this page can be used to actually browse any other profile on the extranet. So for instance, if I type 61, I can find out about Mary J. Blige, who's a Contoso user. I can also, with ID 57, I can see Mark Smith, who's a Starlight user. I can even see internal user like Alan Greenspan, who accessed the site at some point, or Marlene Dietrich, or even Marilyn Monroe as well. So I can get all of those emails and names and accounts and store that in an Excel spreadsheet and then spam those users or resell. So it's obviously a big security issue here. Now, if you look at what we have on the other side, if I go back to my partner extranet here as Jim, now if I try to do the same here, let's say I try to access Mark Smith, well, I see nothing. If I try to see Mary, I see nothing. So how do we actually implement that? Well, it's fairly easy. Let me go back to the site here as a SharePoint administrator. And so I'll go to the site settings, and I'll show you what we have here with the privacy settings, which is available with the professional edition. And so what we have is, what we provide you is the ability to customize how, different types of users can see other users. So for instance, the first option here is for how external users can see other external profiles. So in this case, what I said is, obviously I want to use our custom Extradium user profile page, which is a lot more flexible and secure. And I don't want to show neither first name, last name, email address. On the top level site collection, I do not want users to be able to browse, because obviously both my Bluebird, Contoso, and Starlight users, they connect through that site. Okay, I can do the same with internal users. So internal users, I could also restrict what they see. I can also choose to restrict what users can see about internal users. So I have all those options at my disposal. Now, for instance, you see here that Jim does not see anything on the top level site. However, if he goes to Bluebird and click, let's say, on Mary, Mary is a colleague. So on this site, the privacy settings have been set up so that you can click on the users and you can know who they are. You can get their email addresses, because the assumption is that you can know about them. They're typically your colleagues, or they're the trusted contacts you have. So for instance, Alan Greenspan, here, this is actually a profile of a Windows user. I don't see the email address because that's how the system was configured, but you could definitely share that information as well. So that the first thing I want to mention is that we obviously provide second-factor authentication. That's the last security option that we now have available with the Enterprise Edition of Extradium. And so let me sign out from here. And then once again, it's all web-based. It's all web-driven. You don't have to configure any file. You just go to the second-factor authentication settings here. You say, okay, I want to enable second-factor. I want to enable TOTP, time-based one-time password, which is typically done with smartphone apps. And you can also choose to enable text messages. That we use the Twilio service, which is widely used over the world to send text messages or SMSs. And so now if I go back to the site and I try to log in as, let's say, Mark, now Mark has now to go through the process of setting up an app, so he can choose to say, okay, he wants to be authenticated through with his cell phone number, or he can choose to use an authenticator app such as the Windows Phone Authenticator app. So if he presses next, he just has to scan that QR code and then give it a name, press next, and then enter the code that's generated by the app on the smartphone, and then he's good to go. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go through the whole process here, and then we're running a little bit out of time. So let me go back to my slide decks here, and I think that I'm just going to pass on the presenter role to Joanna, who's going to take over and finish the slide, and then we can go through some questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Raphael. So just to quickly summarize here, we talked about the challenges of external information sharing, the fact that intranets are great to enable collaboration and communication within the company with solutions like SharePoint, but the challenges that one can have with external information sharing. And of course, an extranet like Extradium can help. Many solutions are sometimes hard to use, time-consuming to administer, and as Raphael showed, Extradium does tend to solve a lot of these problems. There are quite a few unique strengths of Extradium that Raphael went through, such as installation ease of use, increased security. And with that, if there's time, we'll come back to talk about the different editions, and I'll leave this here. But I want to pass it back over to Raphael because I know you do have quite a few questions, and we'll go ahead and uncover those now.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you much for that. And let me take a look at the questions that we have at this point. So one question we have is, you show us the assign to field. I was wondering if the sharing option for folder documents will work as the same way as assign to. So the answer is yes. As a matter of fact, whenever you use the people picker in the SharePoint interface, and that's not just in the assign to field. That's also when you assign users to some permissions on the site, or when you actually click on share, you will have you have exactly the same user experience. Now the question is this only per site collection, or can we have the same option but per subsite? So at this point in the current implementation of Extradium, we only provide that with at the site collection level, but we can definitely add those capabilities at the site level. As a matter of fact, we suggest our clients to use site collection as opposed to subsites, because site collections, they're much more secure containers in SharePoint. But obviously we could add that to the site level if that was necessary. Now I have another question here about, does it work with multiple Active Directory? Can I create external users in separate AD instead of database? Can users use their email address to log in instead of username? So there are two questions here. The second question, can you use the email address instead of the username? Yeah, that's something I did not mention or even show, but as a matter of fact, Extradium is probably the only solution where you can use either your username or your email address. Other products, typically they say, oh, you can only use one of them, and so typically they say put the email address as the username. But with Extradium, we wanted to make it more convenient, because sometimes email addresses are just long to type. If you can have a username, then that works better for you. So you can use both. You can whenever you set up an Extradium user, it has both a username and an email address, and you can use either of those to sign in. Now, in terms of Active Directories, we do not integrate. I mean, Extradium does not integrate with Active Directories. So obviously, that's not really something that I can answer at this point. But you can contact us offline and we can discuss that. We have a questions about HIPAA compliant. Well, maybe we can address that offline as well. We do not have a certification for HIPAA at this point. But we certainly probably would fit the requirements. Does it require deployment of a full trust solution? Yes, and that's the reason why we mentioned that the assumption is that we are in a farm, SharePoint 2013 farm environment, not Office 365. So it has to be a farm that you can manage and you can access on the server side. As a matter of fact, if you want to override authentication, you have to have access to the server itself. And how a new user can register? Yeah, that's something that I did not show in the demo. So maybe I can show that a bit more quickly. There's a lot of things that I could actually show. So I don't know if you all see my screen at this point. I think you do, right? So that should be fine. So let me just close that down. And so if I go back to my screen over here, and I don't know why it's not refreshing. Here we go. So you have that sign up link here. If I click on this one, you see that there is a way for you to sign up, and you can customize a lot of the text that shows here. You can see that apart from some of the standard fields such as username and password. Here you see that you can enter another email address, and then you have some additional fields. So for instance, here we ask what your city of work is, what is your country of work. So you can specify that. What is your job role? How much do you know SharePoint? And the way that's done is through the profile properties management, which I haven't actually showed here, because for lack of time. But you can certainly define additional profile properties and when they're marked visible, they will show up on the sign up page, and you can obviously have the users fill out those properties. One thing that I did not show, which I probably want to show at this point, that is actually tied to our registration, is it's another unique feature that we provide, which is called the advanced dynamic registration rules. So, for instance, you can define rules very easily here that say, if the email address ends with Bluebird, and for instance, the registration code, which is a custom profile property, is equal to blue invite, then you're going to assign a user to the Bluebird users group, which is an Extradium user, and notify the admin. You can also have rules that say, hey, if the user tries to sign in with gmail.com, it's going to be denied. You can add additional rules very easily here. So I can say if the email again ends with, let's say, contoso.com, then I'll be able to assign a user to either an Extradium group or a SharePoint group on this site. But I'll just choose an Extradium group and say, okay, you're going to be assigned to the Contoso users group. Okay, so I guess that probably answers your question. Let's see if we have some others. Where are my other questions here? Well, looks like I've lost them. I've lost the questions. Okay, here we go. Questions. Do you provide API? Yes, so that's a good question. That's also something I did not mention, that we do have an API, both a server-side API and a web service API that you can use to trigger that you can use to build advanced customization. As a matter of fact, we have quite a few consulting organizations that work with us, are partnering with us, and they take our software and they customize it at an advanced level. Sometimes not just at the UI level, but also they build additional provisioning solutions through thanks to our API. Does someone approve the user before she gets access to the site? Yes, that's also something that we do allow you to do here on Extradium. So if I go back to my screen here, site settings, you'll see that you have quite a few things that you can customize in the advanced user registration settings. So you can say, okay, I do want to require approval for self-registering users, or bypass activation and approval for invalid users. We have quite a few features in that area, and obviously, for lack of time, I could not mention all of them. So you have the tools that allow direct access to the SQL database for reporting. No specific. Well, we do have reports. Yes, we do have some reports that we provide by default and that you can export. So, for instance, you have the ability to export all the users through this Excel button. You also have audit reports that you can. I did not mention that, by the way, but we also have auditing available, so you can know whenever users try to sign in or sign out, etc. You can export those reports. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, so let me go back to the last few slides, which I think Joanna will show, and then we're going to wrap up, and I'll address all of the other questions offline after the fact. Thank you. Joanna?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Raphael. So again, as I mentioned, with Extradium, you have 3 possible editions to choose from: standard, professional, enterprise. And there's actually a fair amount of customization there among those 3. Quite a bit of options available to you. From a licensing standpoint, it's a per firm license. You can choose user packs anywhere from up to 50 users to unlimited, and that's available in all editions. So you can just contact us for more information. The one other thing I want to make sure that we make all of you aware of is that there is a free edition of Extradium. It's not time limited, it's up to 20 users, so that's definitely something that you can try out, you can start using, and you can contact us at sales@reallinks.com for detailed pricing information on the other editions. The one other thing I want to mention as well is for anyone on the phone, and some of you may be interested in partner programs, reseller support, etc. We do work with resellers, we do work with partners. Extradium is actually quite customizable, so there's opportunity there for resellers and partners to work with us to customize the environment, and they can also use an API on top of Extradium. So those are definitely options available for partners to work with. But again, for those of you who are users, admins, looking for extranet solutions, we definitely would encourage you to take a look at the free edition, download that, and you can certainly get started for a subgroup of up to 20 users and kind of see how Extradium works in your environment. We covered the Q&A, so you will have a survey to fill out. We'd love to have you fill out that survey, answer a few questions, and definitely helps us improve the webinar, make sure that we bring you the information that you need to make your decisions about extranets, etc. And I've also included the contact information here. If you want to follow up, you can either email us at sales@reallinks or at info@reallinks, either way, and check the webpage, check Facebook. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter as well, if that's a preferred means for you to follow up. And again, thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.